Paramahansa Parivrajaka Asto Tarasati Srimad Bhagavatam Sabhai Charana Vinda Bhakti Samshur Prabhupada Ki ISKCON Bibidipad save the whole world Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Parivrajaka Asto Tarasati Srimad Bhagavatam Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavindi Ki Nama Charja Sharayasta Kuriki Premzagaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Sadhguru Bhaktivinoda Sri Sri Radha Krishna Govardhana Shamakun Radha Kun Giri Govardhana Ki Brajbhumi Shivindama Ki Navadip Mayapur Dama Ki Purushtam Chetra Jaganapur Ki Ganga Mai Ki Jamuna Mai Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Tulasi Maharani Ki Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Nitai Gopanemanandi. All glories to somebodies, all glories to somebodies, all glories to somebodies, all glories, let us be to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shishana Kavaca Iti Abhivyahritam Raja Iti Abhivyahritam Raja Idyabhivyahritam Raja Nishamya Bhattara Shabha Nishamya Bhattara Shabha Nishamya Bhattara Shabha Idyabhivyahritam Raja Nishamya Bhattara Shabha Kim Anyat Prishtavan Bhuyo Kim Anyat Prishtavan Bhuyo Kim Anyat Prishtavan Bhuyo Vayasya Kim Rishim Kavim Vayasya Kim Rishim Kavim Vayasakim Rishim Kavim Kim Anyat Prishtavan Bhuyo Vayasakim Rishim Bhavim Kavim Shaunaku Vacha. Shaunaka said Iti thus. So this word thus, it means like after, because Parikshit Maharaj asked some questions. If you look at the end of the first canto, the 18th and 19th chapter, first off in the 18th chapter, Parikshit Maharaj, because he'd been cursed by the Brahman boisterings, and he realized he was going to die. And being that Parikshit was a great devotee of Krishna, he didn't start to lament and think, oh gosh, I'm going to die, it's the end of life, I better, there's this thing these days, people have a bucket list, all the things they want to do before they die, so they start racing around the world, doing everything they want to do before they die. So that wasn't Parikshit Maharaj at all. He was thinking, okay, I'm about to die, therefore I should give up everything and just focus on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which is exactly what he did. There's a really interesting story later on, I think it's in the 8th or 9th canto, probably 9th canto, of Kulasheka. And he had been fighting Kulashekar Maharaj, he had been fighting for the demigods, for the Devotees, for thousands of years. And then they came out successful, and the demigods were very pleased with his fighting. They said, is there any benediction we can give you? And he said, yeah, the only thing I want to know is when am I going to die so I can prepare myself for death. And they said, actually, you have but a moment to live. Just a few moments left. So immediately he just gave up everything and sat down and meditated upon Krishna. So this is the sign of a great devotee, is they actually understand what is the goal of life. And even though they may be engaged in so many material activities, as we see, Parikshit Maharaj, he was ruling the kingdom, he was chastising Kali, he was doing so many different things in the material world. But as soon as he realized that his days were numbered, as soon as he realized he only had 7 days left to live, he thought, okay, I'll sit down on the bank of the river here, give up my whole kingdom, give up my family, wife, children, everything, and just sit down here and meditate on Krishna. And that's exactly what he did. And then, because he was a great devotee, we see the similar thing happen with Bhishmadev. When the sages of the universe found that Bhishmadev was leaving his body, then they all came to hear Bhishmadev because they knew he'd speak. They knew he'd speak, being a great devotee and one of the Mahajans, they knew that he would speak on Dharma. So in the same way, when the sages heard that Parikshit Maharaj was leaving his body, because they knew that this wouldn't be ordinary, this wouldn't just be some sage dying in the forest or something, because he's a great Mahabhagavata, that this would be a special occasion. So they all assembled there, and we see that in the I think it's the 18th chapter, describes all the personalities who assembled there. But also we see that personalities such as Narada and Vyasaki were also there, because they knew, because of the nature of these two great personalities, they could see the future. And they knew that Sukadev Goswami would come there and speak the Bhagavatam. So they were all assembled there. So we see at the end of the 18th chapter, Parikshit Maharaj, he asks all the sages, he says, what is the duty? He asked a few things, but the prime question he asked, what is the duty of one who's about to die? And so they started, because there are many different grades of sages there, and they're offering different opinions and offering different ideas on what you should do at the moment of death. But Parikshit wasn't satisfied with that. And there's also there's even there are impersonalists, there were devoted, karmis and gyanis, and so many different levels of sages were there. But then we see at the beginning of the 19th chapter, which is the last chapter of the first canto, Sukadev Goswami arrives on the scene. And it's quite an extraordinary event if you analyze it. It's because because Sukadev Goswami was completely beyond the concept of body and anything like that. He was fixed in the absolute truth, and so what happened? He was just not at all. Kind of connected with the external world, if you like, and he was being followed by women and young children who were kind of ridiculing him and poking fun at him. But he was completely oblivious to that. But when he arrived on the scene on the bank of the Jamuna, where Parikshit Maharaj was sitting down and waiting for death, and all the sages saw him arrive, and because the sages, they have many great qualities, but one of the things that they're very expert at is physiognomy. So physiognomy means you can tell by looking at a person's body, by the shape of their face, the shape of their ears, the length of their earlobes, all these different types of things. You can tell that they're a Mahabhagavata. So they saw Sukadev Goswami arrive, and of course Narad and Vyasadeva already knew who he was, obviously Vas because he's son, but they could understand he was a great devotee, and they immediately stood up and they offered him the seat of respect. And seeing this, all the women and children who were following Sukadev Goswami became a little bit sort of fearful, and they sort of backed off and they went away because they thought, oh, maybe we've committed some offense here. So they left. And then Sukadev Goswami, he was offered this seat of respect. And then after some preliminary, exchanges between him and Parikshit Maharaj, then Parikshit Maharaj again asked the same question: what is the duty of one who's about to die? And we see that this section here, the first three chapters of this canto, it's quite a short canto, this one, the second canto. There's only 10 chapters in it. But the first three chapters are dealing exclusively with the superiority of Bhakti Yoga. And this is Sukadev Goswami's answering Parikshit Maharaj's questions. Of course, he asked a few other questions, but primarily he asked this question: what is the duty of one who's about to die? And so then this word iti is quite interesting. Because the way it's being used here is because what's happening is he's answered the questions. He's finished answering the questions. You'll see, like especially in the last few verses, how he's concluded his answer to Parikshit Maharaj's question, and basically telling him that devotional service, that's the duty of one who's about to die, is to give up your life, to give up everything external, and simply give your life to the service of Krishna, which he's sat down to do. And so this word iti is then indicating, okay, now he's got the answer to the questions, what did he do? Thus, anyway, I'll go on. There's a few other really interesting words here. Abhivyahitam. Over to you. Yeah. Sorry, I mean some of the words. You see, like Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he gives classes on one word or one verse for months at a time. Each one of these words has got so much meaning in it. I don't know so much about Sanskrit, but I know a little bit, and you can see that there's so much meaning. And the acharyas, they comment on the meanings of these words. So I just wanted to explain why this word's significant. There's a few more significant words in this verse, which I'll explain also. All that was spoken. Raja, the king. Nishamya, by hearing. Bharata rishabha, Maharaj Parikshit. So rishabha means the best. So Bharata Rishabha is indicating Maharaj Parikshit, who was the best of the descendants of the Bharat dynasty. A very, very elevated soul. And Parikshit also means the inquirer, because it describes how earlier on, in the middle of the first canto, the story of how what's his name, the son of Drona. No, what? Huh? The son of Drona, yeah. Ashvatthama. You got the right word, the first word letter right. Yeah, Ashvatthama. Yeah, thank you. So Ashvatthama, he threw this Brahmastra, and he destroyed the embryo in the womb of Uttara. But then Krishna re-established or constituted the embryo, and then when Parikshit, he saw this four-armed form of the Lord in the womb with him, and from that point on in the womb he was looking. He wanted to know who was this. So that's why he's called the Parikshit, means the inquirer. He's looking. He's looking everywhere to try and find this same Lord. And because of him being such a great devotee, he's referred to here as the best of the Bharatas. Kim, what? Anyat, more. Prishtavan, did he inquire? Also very significant, he says, Kim Anyat Prishtavan. So what more did he ask? It's like Shaunaka Rishi is like, he's amazed. It's like, what more could he possibly want to know? Because he's already asked what is the duty of one who's about to die. Surely there's nothing more than that. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that he was amazed. He was in wonder that he was asking, what more did he want to know? Because he already found out everything. But we see that, so ending here in this is kind of like the end of the first section of Parikshit Maharaj's questions. Then going on, we'll see that there's a few chapters which are. A few more verses here, like I think this verse and the following up to verse 16 is glorifying Sukadev and Parikshit, and then it's talking about those unfortunate persons who aren't interested in hearing the Bhagavatam, who aren't interested in hearing about the Lord's glories. that goes to the end of the chapter. Then we'll see in chapter 4, Parikshit Maharaj, he asks 4 more questions, and he asks about the creation. Well, how did Krishna create everything? And so from chapters 4 through to 7, the creation is explained. Then we find 8 to 10 that Parikshit asks more questions. He asks another 21 questions. And Sukadev Goswami answers some of those questions. And he does this by quoting a dialogue between Narad and Brahma. Where Narad was approaching Brahma because he was thinking that Brahma was supreme. So he approached him. He was asking him, "Well, actually, it seems to me that you're not supreme. It seems like there's someone else who's above you." So he's wanting to know that. And then also at the end, in the 10th chapter, we also see the Chatta Sloki of the Bhagavatam is explained, where Brahma is explaining the 4 essential verses from which the whole Bhagavatam is explained. So we see very, very significant statements here, and Shaunaka Rishi is quite amazed that he's going to ask more questions. And keep in mind, this is just this second canto is actually the beginning of the Bhagavatam. First canto sets the scene. The second canto is where the dialogue starts to take place between Parikshit and Sukadev Goswami. And so he's quite surprised that there's more questions because he thought he'd already got the answer to everything. Bhuyo, again, Vayasakim, unto the son of Vyasadeva. Rishim, one who is well versed. Kavim, poetic. So we see here that also Shaunaka Rishi is talking about Sukadev Goswami. He's talking about some of his qualities. One who's well versed. He knows the Shastras very well. And also he's poetic, Kavim. A great devotee is understood to be poetic. So, Prabhupada's translation. Shaunaka said, the son of Vyasadeva, Srila Sukadev Goswami, was a highly learned sage and was able to describe things in a poetic manner. What did Maharaj Parikshit again inquire from him after hearing all that he had said? Responsively, please. Shaunaka said, the son of Vyasadeva, Srila Sukadev Goswami, was a highly learned sage and was able to describe things in a poetic manner. What did Maharaj Parikshit again inquire from him after hearing all that he had said? Purport. A pure devotee of the Lord automatically develops all godly qualities, and some of the prominent features of those qualities are as follows. He is kind, peaceful, truthful, equable, faultless, magnanimous, mild, clean, non-possessive, a well-wisher to all, satisfied, surrendered to Krishna, without hankering, simple, fixed, self-controlled, a balanced eater, sane. That's a good one in this day and age, sane. And how many sane people are there? There's so many nutcases around, isn't it? People just, they're just so disturbed by the material nature, so disturbed by, everything in this day and age. Mannerly, prideless, grave, sympathetic, friendly, poetic, and Prabhupada has italicized that for emphasis because obviously we're talking about poetic here. Expert and silent. What does silent mean? What do you think silent means? It means you don't speak? Huh?
Talk about Krishna.
Sorry? No. What does silent mean?
Talk about Krishna.
Yeah, it means you only talk about Krishna. Because we see, and like earlier on in the Bhagavatam, it talks about, there are so many topics that people talk about in this day and age, I mean, just you see, whenever people meet, they're talking about the weather, they're talking about this, they're talking about that. But someone who's silent is only talking about Krishna. And this is the point that's being made here, is Sukadev Goswami. He only spoke about Krishna. And that's why when he was traversing the planet, and you see the same with, it's interesting because later on in the 3rd canto, there's a really interesting section there where Uddhava and Vidura meet. And Vidura had been, traveling all around the world on pilgrimage, yet he wasn't known who he was because he was a great soul, and therefore he was very silent. And when he met people or when people saw him, he wasn't talking about his life or anything like that. So they didn't really understand who he was. But then when he met Uddhava, immediately he started to ask him questions about Krishna, because he wanted to know about Krishna. But normally he wouldn't be speaking. And so this silence also is quite an interesting quality. Out of these 26 prominent features of a devotee, as described by Krishnadas Kaviraj in his Chaitanya Charitamrita, the qualification of being poetic is especially mentioned herein in relation to Sukadev Goswami. The presentation of Srimad Bhagavatam by his recitation is the highest poetic contribution. He was a self-realized learned sage. In other words, he was a poet amongst the sages. So, from this, I see there are like two main points we can learn from this verse and from this purport. One is that through practicing devotional service, through actually becoming advanced in devotional service, all the good qualities manifest in a living entity. There's a nice verse in the 5th canto, 8th chapter of the Bhagavatam. This is spoken by Prahlad Maharaj. He's glorifying the Sukadeva. And it says, Yashasti Bhakti Bhagavati Kinchana Savai Gunais Tatra Samasate Sura. So the first point is making that for one who's Yashasti Bhakti Bhagavata, so that person becomes a great devotee. Anyone who becomes a great devotee. And it says, Savai Gunai. So all the good qualities, Samasata Sura, of the demigods. Samasata means the same. Sama means the same. So they become the same as the demigods, basically, because all these good qualities manifest them. And then he goes on to say, Harava Bhaktasha Kuto Mahadguna. He said, but however, Harava Bhaktasha Kutoma, he says there's not even one good quality in those persons who are not devotees of Krishna. Harava Bhaktasha Kuto Mahadguna Mananatenasi Dhavato Bahi. And he says even if they're adept at the practice of mystic yoga or the honest endeavor of maintaining their family and relatives, they must, he says, Mananatenasi, they must be driven by their own mental speculations and hovering on the mental platform. So Krishnadas Kaviraj, because Prabhupada's talking here about Krishnadas Kaviraj, mentions the good qualities. And so there's two places specifically that I'm thinking of where Krishnadas Kaviraj is talking about qualities. One is in the 8th chapter of the Adi Leela, where, in those early sections of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's talking about all the different trees of devotees, coming from Nityananda, Advaita, and Srivasana. It talks about many great souls. And so in the 8th chapter, he's talking about a few different devotees. One devotee he talks about is Thakur Haridas. And he says that Haridas Thakur, he actually manifests the 50 different qualities. We see in the Nectar of Devotion, it talks about, I can't remember what chapter is in Nectar of Devotion, but it talks about the 64 qualities of Krishna. And then it mentions, it gives percentages there, but it says actually the first 50 qualities of Krishna, that any jiva can have those qualities. Not any jiva, but any great personality can have those qualities, and up to Lord Brahma. But then there's some qualities above that. I can't remember. I think it might be 5 qualities above that, like Lord Shiva has. And there's another 5 above that Narayan also has. And there's 4 above that only Krishna has. He has beautiful 3-fold bending form. He's engaged in loving pastimes with his devotees. What is it? Madhu? I can't remember. Huh? Yeah, Leela Madhu, Rupa Madhu. Yeah. There's a verse, but Rupa. There's the pastimes. There's the form. There's sweet exchanges. There's four qualities that only Krishna possesses. But so the point that he's making there in the 8th chapter is Thakur Haridas. He's manifesting, and of course they don't manifest them to the same degree. Krishna manifests all these pastimes in full. all these qualities in full. The jiva manifests these things to a limited degree. And then also he goes on to glorify other devotees, but in particular he talks about one devotee called Pandit Haridas. And he mentions there of the different qualities that Pandit Haridas had. Then many wonderful qualities. He only mentions about a dozen or so. But then later on we see, if we go into the Madhya Lila chapter 22, I think it is, verses 78 through to 80, then Krishnadas Kaviraj, he mentions the 26 qualities of devotee. I can't remember the first word is Kripalu, meaning merciful, and this is actually the 3 verses that Satsarup Maharaj then turned into a book called the 26 Qualities of Devotee. And I remember when I joined ISKCON that this was the book had just been released, and we all had a copy of the book and we were reading it. Very, very, very wonderful descriptions. And Maharaj had gone through Prabhupada's books and found many passages where Prabhupada was glorifying these 26 qualities. So the point is, and this verse that Prabhupada's referring to here, this Yashasti Bhakti Bhagavati Kinchana, is how by engaging in the practice of devotional service and by becoming purified through the process of bhakti, then automatically all these qualities develop. Now, in one sense it's automatic, in one sense it's not. Because it doesn't just mean you just chant Hare Krishna and automatically everything's going to happen from that. Of course, if we were able to chant Hare Krishna purely, then that would be the case. But because of our limitations, because of our conditioning, it doesn't happen that easy. We engage in the various practices of devotional service, and our conditionings keep interrupting, if you like. They keep coming up. They keep, just like we see in our interactions with devotees. You look at these qualities here, and it's talking about the qualities of Sukadev Goswami, and you can imagine that it's talking about how he's kind, he's peaceful, he's truthful, he's equable, he's equal to all. Now you can imagine a person who's kind, peaceful, truthful, equable, faultless, magnanimous, mild. What kind of interactions are they going to have with devotees? They're going to be quite sattvic, quite saintly, quite enlivening, and nurturing a person's qualities in devotional service. But at least I can talk for myself. I mean, obviously I'm not talking about all of you, but I can talk for myself that I see sometimes in my interactions with others, sometimes they're harsh, sometimes they're a little bit impersonal, sometimes they're a little bit self-centered. And I'm sure we've all experienced things like that. So we can see how, and this is coming from our past conditioning. And so we can see how our past conditioning, we bring baggage with us into our practice of bhakti. Therefore, in order to overcome these things and develop these wonderful saintly qualities, we need to practice bhakti. And Jiva Goswami, he points this out in the Bhakti Sandarbha. Prabhupada quotes this in many places throughout the Bhagavatam, and the Chaitanya Charitamrita. He talks about, he quotes these 2 verses, 283, 84 from the Bhakti Sandarbha. And in there, Jiva Goswami is talking about the nature of bhakti and how it's the opinion of Bhagavatam that the only thing you need in this age is to chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. You don't need to take initiation. You don't need to engage in any of these practices. He says, however, as far as we have experienced, that those people who come to us for initiation, their minds and their hearts are so contaminated by the modes of material nature, therefore they need to get initiated. Therefore, at the time of initiation, they need to engage in deity worship. Because the process, deity worship is very interesting. That there's a section, I think it's the 12th chapter of the 7th canto, where, and I was just having a conversation about this last night with some of our team members, the extraordinary nature of engaging in deity worship. Many of us, view it externally and think, oh, it's very, very nice. Radha Govardhan look very beautiful, and so do Krishna Balaram, Gaunitai, and that's about as far as it goes. But the nature of the process of deity worship, because you're interacting directly with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's not like this is a representation and he's somewhere else and sometimes we get some blessings and some mercy. This is directly Krishna present before us, and this is described in that verse, that story about Sakshi Gopal, the Brahman. He says, Saksha Prajendanandana. He says, my dear Lord, you're not a statue. You're directly the son of Nanda Maharaj Krishna. He's talking to the deity. So, through the process of deity worship, and this is going to be described in subsequent verses, in verse 15 and verse 22 in this chapter, how Parikshit Maharaj was engaged in deity worship, even as a child. And we also see in the third canto, Uddhava was engaged in deity worship as a child. And so much, he was so in rapture and just completely absorbed in deity worship. He was offering bhoga to his deities. His mother calls him for breakfast. He won't come because he has to finish the service of the Lord. He's just so absorbed. And we see in the lives of great devotees, Prabhupada as a child, because Prabhupada, you'll see in verse 15, he draws this comparison between Parikshit Maharaj and himself, because Prabhupada, when he was a child, we know the story of Prabhupada having Rath Yatra and that, and you read this story in the Leelamrita. It's a fantastic story. He was like the master of ceremonies. He was engaging all his friends, and he was engaging his sister, and he was insisting the chariot had to be just like the chariot in Puri, and he engaged all the neighborhood ladies in cooking, so they had a big feast, and it went on for 5 days. They had this festival, and Prabhupada was orchestrating this whole festival. But then later, after that, he asked his father to give him Radha Krishna deities. And those Radha Krishna deities, there's different stories. My understanding is those Radha Krishna deities eventually wound up on the altar in Mayapur. And if you're fortunate enough to take darshan of Radha Madhava in Mayapur, you'll see that Madhava always has his arm resting on a stick. Yeah? You look down the bottom of the stick, there's a little oval-shaped picture. And that picture is those deities, because they were stolen quite some years ago now. But that's those deities. And Janani regularly worships that picture with those deities, because he had many years he was worshipping those deities of Madhava. But the point I'm making, though, is we see that in the lives of all great devotees, they engaged in deity worship. Now, obviously for a great soul, they don't necessarily need to do that. But for us, it's very important, because and this is the point, the verse I was alluding to in the 7th canto, where it mentions there that when Narada and the other great souls saw that as a result of because in Satya Yuga, people acted in a very, very sattvic way. They actually were possessing many of these qualities. But then as the yugas progressed, especially when it got to Treta Yuga, for instance, then these qualities start to disappear. Therefore, it says, the sages, seeing these disrespectful dealings amongst people, introduce deity worship. Because the whole point with deity worship is there's so many rules and regulations associated with deity worship, and a lot of it is all about the interactions between you and the deity. When you receive the deity, the first thing you do is you fold your palms, you offer a seat, please sit down. Then swagatam, suswagatam, you are welcome, you're very welcome. Then you bathe the feet, you offer water for reception, and so many different things. And it's very, very imbued with this whole mood of awe and reverence. So very, very, especially for a sadhaka, for someone who's a kanista, very, very important to actually understand how to interact. And that starts by we start to learn how to interact with Krishna. Then we take those same things we learn and we apply them to our interactions with devotees. It's not like we just do all these things on the altar and forget about it. This is Vaishnava culture. This is Vedic culture. And we see, if you read I think it's in the Govinda Leelamrita, because sometimes you hear devotees saying, oh yeah, but this is all this Aishvarya stuff, I'm more interested in Vrindavan mood and things like that. But it's the same way the residents of Vrindavan interact with each other. Even the Dham interacts with the Lord like that. There's a description in the Govinda Leelamrita how it talks about, Padya and all the 16 items of devotional service, of deity worship, or worshiping a person. And it talks about how the Jew that sits on the leaves in the morning, and then when Krishna walks past, it falls on his feet. And so the Dham is offering Padya to wash the feet of the Lord, and how when the champak tree grows, champak, they have flowers that are a little bit shaped like a flame, and the wind blows, and then the flowers on the champak tree are going like this, and it's like it's offering an arti or a lamp to Krishna. So we see the Dham even worships Krishna in the same way we see it's described in deity worship, but in a much more, like what we do on the altar is more imbued with Aishvarya. What's happening in Vrindavan is more imbued with Madhurya. It's sweetness. There's much more sweetness there. So we see that the same principles are there. So it's not something that's just exclusively isolated to when we're doing deity worship. This is meant to appear in our culture. This is meant to appear in the way we're interacting with each other. And this is a really important part of deity worship, is to understand how this is an intrinsic part of the culture. And by practicing these activities, by learning how to interact, then we start to develop qualities, because we're training ourselves how to interact properly with others. And because the mind becomes regulated, becomes controlled through engaging in a pancharatric process such as deity worship, then the bad qualities are suppressed and the natural good qualities start to wake up. So that was one of the points I thought was really significant in this verse, is about how the qualities naturally appear from practicing bhakti. But then also there was another point I thought was really important here, is how a great person is known by their qualities. And if you look in the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, a very simple example, in the 18th chapter, Krishna is talking to Arjuna about the natures of Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Sudras. If you look at the way he describes the Vaishyas and Sudras, what does he talk about? Anyone familiar with these verses? He talks about activities. He talks about what they do. The Sudras are doing commerce, they're looking after cows, they're doing farming, things like that. The Sudras engage in service to others. But then if you look at the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas, who are the heads of society, he talks about the qualities. The Kshatriya, heroism, chivalry in battle, bravery, strength, valor, all these types of things. And then the Brahmana, he talks about, what's that verse? Gone blank. He just talks about, truthfulness, honesty, religiousness. I can't remember all of them, but he says these are the natural qualities by which the Brahmana. So he's talking about qualities. We also see that Kapila Dev, when he's speaking to Devahuti in the 3rd canto, he says Tatiksva Kunarika Sutara Savada Ajita Satava Santa Sadava Sadabhushana. He talks about the qualities of a devotee. And we'll see that in the 5th canto, in his commentary on that verse 5.8.12 that I was mentioning before, Prabhupada also makes this point, that this is how you distinguish a devotee from a non-devotee, is devotees have qualities, non-devotees don't have qualities. And we see in this world that people are put in big positions, and they're glorified as being great persons. They might become the Prime Minister of a country, or the President of a country, or a famous sports star, or whatever. But look at what's going on in Australia right now. I mean, I don't want to get too much into social politics or whatever, but look at what's going on in Australia right now, in the politics in Australia. Probably none of you follow the news, but there's so many politicians in this country are being pulled from their position. Why? Because of the way they're interacting with women, because they're using women for sense enjoyment. Yeah? So, do they possess qualities? If that's what they're doing. Of course not. They have, as Prahlad Maharaj says, he says, Harava Bhaktasya Kuto Mahadguna. They have no good qualities. And we shouldn't take this lightly and think it's just, this is just fanatical devotee speak or something like that. This is Prahlad Maharaj speaking. And he says they have no good qualities, because their whole focus is simply sense gratification. Their whole focus is simply, how can I improve my position in this material world? How can I enjoy my situation in this material world? Whereas a devotee has a completely opposite perspective on it. A devotee's perspective is how can I satisfy Krishna? How can I help others come closer to Krishna? Their center is Krishna. Their whole life is centered around Krishna, whereas the non-devotees, their whole life is centered around themselves and their extended self. It's a very big difference. And therefore we see, don't be surprised. Don't be surprised when you're interacting with non-devotees. And of course, they're very expert at externally presenting, what are so-called good qualities and being politically correct and all this kind of stuff. But when it actually gets down to it, when you actually, if you start to push their buttons, you'll see how they interact. You'll see how they react to that. If you start to upset someone, then you'll see the nice speech disappears, the nice behavior disappears. But someone like Sukadev Goswami or Parikar or Yudhisthira, even Yudhisthira at the Balakura Kshetra, he was challenged in so many different ways, but still he maintained his good qualities. He maintained his good behavior. But you see, Duryodhana and the others, look at the things they did. When Abhimanyu, when he was killed by I think it was 9 or 11 warriors, they ganged up on him and they cut his bowstring and then they killed him. Completely heinous. A Kshatriya should never do things like that. It should be like equal. You should always fight equally. But 11 ganged up on him and they cut his bowstring so he couldn't fight. And then he got down off the chariot, he picked up a sword and he was going to kill them all with his sword. And they're shooting at him with arrows, again, breaking the principles, the code of conduct. Because they're shooting arrows at him, he's got a sword. No, you don't do that, you should fight on equal. So it reveals their nature. It reveals actually how they were not, following proper conduct. It reveals actually they were non-devotees. So we can see that when devotees they're put in challenging situations, especially advanced devotees, they actually maintain their good qualities. Whereas we see with non-devotees, all these bad qualities come out when they're put under pressure. And that's how you can understand a person's nature is when they're under pressure, how do they respond? What do they take shelter of? If they take shelter of the material nature, the mind, senses, things like that, you can understand either they're not devotees or not very advanced. But someone who's under pressure and they take shelter of Krishna, like we see Parikshit Maharaj here, he's about to die. He knows he's got 7 days left and he's not running around trying to, you see like sometimes I remember when I was a child, I actually used to work in a supermarket. And they used to give these things where, they'd have these prizes where you've got 10 minutes, right, in the supermarket, and anything you can get into your basket within 10 minutes is yours to keep, And they just run around madly, just trying to, no brain to it at all, They didn't just think, okay, where's the most expensive things in the supermarket? I'll go there. They just get the trolley, just run down the aisles, and just throwing in all sorts of rubbish they'll never use anyhow, And it's like that, people in this material world, if they find out, they've got X amount of time to die, what do? Try to squeeze as much enjoyment as they can into that time. That wasn't Parikshit. He just sat down on the bank of the Jamuna and said, okay, what is my duty now? And that's the whole Bhagavatam, is the dialogue based on Parikshit's inquiries. Okay, so I'll finish there. Any comments or questions at all? Yeah, Prabhu. Sorry?
The deities are here in the temple also. They must be engaging in pastimes.
Yeah.
How can we meditate on that? Without being speculated.
Yeah, so Prabhu's asking, the Lord here is on the altar in the spiritual world and is obviously engaged in pastimes. How to meditate upon those pastimes without sort of going off course and sort of getting involved in speculation. The simple thing is just to meditate upon what's given in the Shastras, the pastimes that are given in the Shastras. Because because it's coming from realized persons, we know that it's the absolute truth. But if we start to, we often, and this is something that I'm dealing with right now. We have some proposals in with the GBC about the way devotees are dressing deities now. I saw some photos the other day where Krishna was dressed as Lord Shiva. Now, we understand, this Shiram Yatadada Vikara Vishesha Yoga, that it's an expansion of Krishna. But as the verse says, just as yogurt is nothing but milk, you can't turn it back into milk. So in the same way, Shiva is nothing but Krishna, but you can't turn him into Krishna, and neither should we turn Krishna into Shiva. So we see that, you know, there's these speculations coming up. Because why? Because we're, you know, engaged in this fertile material mind, and not sort of having some kind of parameters. But if we follow the descriptions that are given by the acharyas in the Shastra, then there's very clear parameters. You know, and there's many wonderful stories there of the acharyas' meditations upon Krishna and his pastimes, and you know, so that would be my response to that. Is that okay? I mean, what's your answer?
Probably speculate. I guess when we have festivals, it's more reciprocated, you can say. The deities are participating in those festivals. And when we engage in worship, it's reciprocation.
Yeah. Yeah.
When there is ecstatic kirtan, what do find us?
Yeah. Krishna's always reciprocating. He's always reciprocating. There's never a point that he's not reciprocating with us. It's just because of our material conditioning, because our eyes are covered. There's that verse in the Ishopanishad, I think it's Ishopanishad, where the author's praying to please, you know, remove this effulgence so I can actually see your form. So, you know, the Lord's always there and he's always reciprocating. It's just because of our conditioning we don't see it. There's a nice verse in the 4th chapter of the Gita where Krishna says, Ye yata mam prapatante tangstatai vijamyaham. He says, as they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. So the more we're able to let go of our conditioning, the more we're able to just give ourselves to the Lord, the more the Lord reveals himself to us. And then there's a class Prabhupada gave in the when he installed the small deities in Los Angeles, Rukmini Dwarkanath. And in that class he was talking about, you know, the mood that we need to take in the worship. And then he said, you know, if we're able to take up this mood of worship, he says, one day that Krishna, he was pointing to the deity, he says, that Krishna, he will dance for you. One day that Krishna, he will talk to you. You know, so that story of the Brahman and the sweet rice, we see how he was having a conversation with Krishna, and how actually Krishna walked halfway across India in order to, you know, satisfy his devotee. And so many, I could spend hours and hours and hours telling stories about deities that have directly reciprocated with devotees. You know, so, you know, and that's the point of that pastime of Sakshi Gopal. He says, Pratima nahitumi Saksha Prajendana. He says, my dear Lord, you're not a statue. You're directly the son of Nanda Maharaj Krishna. So by serving the deity, you know, like either we're serving here in the temple room, we clean the temple room, we bring gifts for the deities, whatever, or by doing deity worship on the altar, then it helps us to remove this anatta of thinking the deity is matter, thinking the deity is just a statue, and actually he's directly present before us. And through the service process, you know, it's just like, you know, and I think this is relevant for more for men than it is for women, because, you know, like a woman's carrying a child in a womb for you know, Vedically speaking, 10 months. Therefore, this relationship's already developing. Whereas for a man, it's not such a tangible thing. But when the man starts to engage in service for the child, looking after the child, you know, bathing, clothing, feeding, all that sort of stuff, then the man's attachment starts to develop. So it's the same with any relationship. By this exchange of service, then relationship develops, love develops. So in the same way, by an exchange of service with Krishna, then love develops. And as that love develops, then he reveals himself to us. Okay, yes? Anasuya Mataji.
Thanks for the class. I was wondering, if I understand it, with deity worship, we first ask for the blessings of Guru and the Parampara, really wear their instruments and wear serving teaching.
A little louder, I can't.
I the parampara to perform that worship, and when the mood, correct mood is as being an instrument for them to perform worship for Krishna. And I was wondering, what if you, like, as you do deity worship, sometimes you naturally form affection for the deities. And how do you know that your consciousness is, I can't think of another word, but bona fide? Like that sometimes you can feel reciprocation from the deities and you're wondering, are you qualified?
I mean, that's something that comes up a bit because, because of our material conditioning, and we see in material relationships, like sometimes there's an inappropriate relationship, say for instance between mother and son, for instance, or brother and sister. We see there's inappropriate, we won't go into the details, but it often happens in this material world. There's an inappropriate relationship there. So the same, because of that conditioning, because we don't actually understand the relationship at this point, therefore there can be inappropriate thoughts or a mood in that relationship. So therefore, this is why the process or the Guru Parampara, the process of initiation, the process of taking shelter of a Guru is so essential. Because when we have these feelings, we have these experiences, then we need to ask the Guru, or not necessarily Diksha Guru, it can also be Siksha Guru, someone we see as Siksha. Then we ask someone, it's like, is this appropriate? I had this thought, this feeling, whatever, is this appropriate? And obviously, Srila Prabhupada, as our prominent Siksha Guru, has given us so much direction in this regard. There's a nice purport in the 4th canto, chapter 24, text 45-46, where Srila Prabhupada explains what is the mood of worship in ISKCON. Sometimes devotees will start to, my mood's in the mood of worship, so the Vrindavan mood. But you're not qualified for that yet. Vrindavan means, 24 hours a day, nothing but Krishna. There's no thought of myself whatsoever. Even we heard yesterday, and also the first class that Dev Maharaj gave, he was talking about how the cowherd boys, right? They, in a sense, pretend to be hungry. Why? Because they know that Krishna won't eat unless they eat. So because they don't want Krishna to be hungry, therefore they say, I'm hungry. So it's not like there's a material desire on their behalf, I'm hungry, I want to eat. No, they're thinking, if we don't eat, Krishna won't eat. So their mood's so different from ours. It's just another reality altogether. So we can't pretend that that's where we're at. So Prabhupada he does emphasize that the mood of worship, especially for neophytes, is this mood of awe and reverence, Aishvarya. And rather than worshipping Radha Krishna, we're worshipping Lakshmi Narayan. So therefore you see, dressed in great opulence, wearing crowns and lots of jewelry and things like that. And Prabhupada encouraged that very much. Not that we should just, I'll just put, Vrindavan mood, one necklace or something like that. No, very, very opulent, because it attracts the mind. Because if you look around you in this world, we're attracted, that I remember when I was a young kid, there was a band, I can't remember the name of the band, but they had this Bright Lights Big City, went to my baby's head. We see like when you go into the city, there's all the bright lights, there's the music, or you go into shopping centers. Shopping centers are incredible. They're very, very. Psychologists actually plan out. Especially these big sort of shopping centers, like you go to, I don't know, Carindale or something like that in Brisbane. Very, very psychologically planned out. The music they play, the way the shops are set up, the lighting, everything. It's set up just to attract your senses. And that's what the material world's about. It's just to attract your senses. So the idea is to take these same principles and apply them in Krishna consciousness. Make Krishna very beautiful. Dress him so he's very beautiful. Dress him so he's very attractive with great opulence. Then the senses are drawn to Krishna. And once the senses are drawn to Krishna, Prabhupada explains, you forget the rubbish sex songs in the material life that are broadcast on the radio everywhere. You forget about these things in the material world. You're just drawn to Krishna. Yeah? So we start off in Aishvarya. We start off with this mood of awe and reverence. You are very great, I am very small. Understand the position. And this Prabhupada confirms at the end of the 10th chapter of the Gita. There's this whole mood of Aishvarya. So, yeah. Thank you. Okay. Sounds like time to go for prasad. Thank you very much to Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Go Premanandi.